Let's talk about something you've probably seen blowing up recently, the Pokemon League. If you haven't, or this is the future, basically it's a bunch of cut ideas from all the way back in Gen 4 that took old folklore tales and threw Pokemon in as replacements, leading to some pretty twisted stories, stuff I'd rather not repeat. These ideas never made it into the games and aren't canon, but that hasn't stopped people from losing their minds over them. I mean, I find it pretty amusing. People are digging through someone's trash and then acting shocked when they find trash. Normally, I just laugh it off and move on. But I actually picked up on a lesson for storytellers in all this mess. See, the average person would look at these leaks, have a little emotional meltdown, and leave it at that. Maybe they try to explain why it's bad, because it's too weird or inappropriate or whatever. But here's the thing, while those reactions make sense, I'm seeing it differently. These ideas aren't bad because they're wild or out there. They're bad because they don't support the emotional core of Pokemon. Pokemon has always been about discovery, achievement, and heartfelt bonds. Anything that doesn't align with those feelings just feels off. And that's exactly why these ideas were trashed. And honestly, judging ideas through this lens is something a lot of writers can learn from. You might start with a great idea, but if your story starts to drift, you'll end up with plot holes, characters that go nowhere, and worldbuilding that doesn't even serve the story. That's why it's so important to have a clear emotional anchor guiding your decisions. For those of you who don't know what an anchor is, it's what keeps a project from going all over the place. It's a little something I learned from the laws of creativity. As it explains, anchors are either a problem you need to fix, like making something work better, or an idea you're trying to figure out. If it's a problem anchor, you're working towards a solution to that one thing. If it's a concept anchor, you're digging into an idea to see how you can bring it to life. So how do you avoid all those headaches I mentioned and actually keep the story on track from the start? Let's talk about emotional anchor. I thought about anchors in terms of story and realized something. Every story has its own anchor. It's like the lens you use to judge everything else through. So, I call it the emotional anchor, which is basically the core feeling you want your audience to experience. Once you know what that is, everything else in storytelling becomes easier to deal with because you've got the emotional compass guiding all your decisions. It becomes your go-to tool for figuring out what works and what doesn't. It helps you cut through all the noise and distractions because you've got a clear benchmark to measure everything against. Every decision, whether it's about plot, character arcs, or even little details, gets filtered through that core emotional experience. Does it serve the anchor or does it pull away from it? It's like having a GPS for your story, keeping you from wandering off into random plot lines or adding stuff that doesn't fit. When you've got that emotional clarity, you can avoid the usual storytelling traps, like going off in tangents that don't matter or losing sight of what your audience is actually supposed to feel. It keeps everything focused and aligned with the real heart of storytelling. After all, at its core, storytelling is all about communicating emotion. Really, that's the literal whole point of art. It's how you take what's inside of you, your own feelings, thoughts, and experiences, and turn it into something that other people can connect with. If you're not clear on the emotions you want to get across, you're missing the point entirely. It's what leads to people who create empty works, who drift off into tangents or overcomplicate things. It's what leads to creators who try too hard on technical aspects, like thinking a complex or intricate world building is enough to carry the whole thing. It's the substance which gives meaning to the style. Now, having said all that, let's address the question of how that I'm sure is on your mind. After all, if you've made it this far, you're probably thinking, okay, I get it, but how do I actually do this? Luckily, this isn't too difficult. We're going to make sense of everything with my WriteTech system. It's a creative framework I've designed around this lesson to help you both construct and analyze stories with emotional clarity. Here's how it works. First, identify the emotional experience that inspired you. What's the core feeling you want to give your audience? For me, I've always been drawn to caper stories, stuff like Kaito Kid, or San Lupin, Burn Notice, White Collar, and Leverage. I wanted to capture the feelings of empowerment, tension, and camaraderie, which all these provide me. That's the compass from which I make all my decisions. If you're struggling to pin down the core feelings you want to get across in your story, no worries. I've got some key questions at the end of this video to help you with that. But before we get there, let's talk about the next step, defining your story's emotional arc. You've got to map out the emotional journey. What are the key emotional beats you're building towards? What do you want your audience to feel at different points? You're guiding them through an emotional transformation. Figure out what it looks like. Once you've got that nailed down, the next step is mastering the 6 pillars of literature storytelling. This is where craft comes in. Craft is the tool that turns your ideas into something real and effective. It gives you control, precision, and makes sure your story resonates with your audience the way you want it to. It's about making sure the how of your story supports the what and the why behind it. In writing, I've broken down craft into 6 core elements, which I call the 6 pillars of literature storytelling: character, plot, theme, genre, world building, and prose. Why these 6? Well, let me break it down to you real quick. Characters are the emotional heart of the story. They're the ones the audience connects with. Every decision you make about them is to make sure the audience feels invested in what's happening. Plot is the structure that delivers these emotional beats at the right time. It's what makes sure the audience feels things when you want them to. Theme is what gives your emotional experiences deeper meaning. It's the universal idea or truth that sticks with the audience after the story is over. Genre sets the emotional expectations for your audience and helps them meet them. It's the key to keeping them engaged and satisfied. World building gives your story its context and makes everything feel more real. It's what immerses your audience in the emotional experience. And prose is how the story is told. It's what shapes the mood of each scene and impacts how your audience feels moment to moment. Every decision I make in my writing comes down to knowing the emotion I want to get across and figuring out which tool, whether it's character, plot, or whatever, best serves that. Take a chapter I wrote recently. I had a car wreck happen, but just writing it out plainly didn't cut it. I lacked the emotional punch, the tension, and the pacing I needed. It felt flat, so I used rhetoric to get the impact I wanted. For example, I used anaphora to build desperation in the moment, repeating phrases to amp up the urgency. And later, I used epiphora to give a sense of resignation, hammering home that feeling of helplessness. It's kind of like figuring out the perfect seasoning to bring out the flavor in a dish. And of course, pulling this off takes awareness of these things and practices, which is what this channel is all about. So, if you want more resources like this, don't forget to support the channel by liking the video and leaving a comment. And hey, here's an idea. How would you answer the 8 questions I promised to share? Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether the answers to these questions or something else. And if you need help working through them, ask away. I'll be here to help.